Okay, hey all, welcome back to 73 Fantasy, behind the scenes. I'm joined here again today by Karl and Peter. We hope you're all doing really well. So for today's sort of episode, we wanted to sort of deep dive into the unusual circumstance we find ourselves in with COVID sort of 19. So Karl, Peter, COVID-19 has been sort of a real sort of weird sort of challenge. How have you sort of dealt with it with sort of 73 Fantasy?
Karl, do you want to take that?
I can do, yeah. When did it all happen? March. So we were kind of, 5 months in, I guess, when it hit. So the research phase had been out of the way, and people were starting to kind of write profiles and get those together. I think the timing is about right for that. So the first thing I think is that obviously we couldn't meet as everyone scattered to the four winds. So I think I'd been up once or twice to Edge Hill before then, just to do some like face-to-face design brief meetings right at the beginning and explain what the whole thing's about and what we were going to be doing for the next couple of years. So that put an end to that pretty quickly. But I would say we adapted kind of pretty quick as the rest of the world did, and it wasn't long before we were kind of on Zoom. And that, if anything, to a positive to take out of it is that was actually really good because I got to work. I don't know if the team would agree with this, but I get to meet and greet and spend a lot more time with the team this time round than we probably did with Pulp, and I'd continue that in the future. I think I'd keep that up because it's part of the reason to kind of do this project in the first place was just to kind of work with teams again. So that was quite good. But yeah, it stopped that. I guess the biggest impact really was in the later stages of playtesting. Once that was all out of the way, I'll let Peter talk about the kind of the editorial work we did over the summer in a minute. But after that, it was the playtesting. We had 3 or 4 different projects all in line kind of over here, and they all suffered from the same thing: is that you can't get 2 people in a room to play and test a game. There's ways around it, but it makes it a lot more difficult. So that kind of impacted. But again, we worked around that and just took it out to external playtesters instead, where there were kind of some family members together and other ones that did it. And I'd probably do that again in the future as well. We didn't do that on Pulp, but I would do it again, I think, if we did any future projects.
Yeah. Yeah, because with the sort of 70 Fantasy, it's like an intern over sort of 2 years, and there's a few people who sort of came in the second year for the sort of the marketing side of things, and they didn't get to actually sort of play the game and understand it, and it's quite hard to play it solo. I've played a few games of Pulp solo where you kind of play against yourself, but it's just not quite the same, is it?
No, not really. In there, we obviously needed to do that, and I'd say probably out of all of the sets of games we've done, this has been play tested more than anything else by the kind of the external play testers, and we set up a kind of a process to kind of manage and check with that. But I think in hindsight, if we did any future projects, I'd do the same again. We'd still do the internal play testing that we did because that's a great kind of learning experience for the students to see, okay, do I understand the system and have what I've written, does that kind of work on the tabletop? But getting an external set of eyes on it is, really important as well. And we quite lucky really because we didn't get a huge amount of kind of playtesting comments back. There were a few bits and pieces that we needed to adjust. But that was more layering of kind of rules on top of one another. But it's my greatest disappointment really is the team haven't been able to have that kind of experience of directly playing what they've learned and written. That's that.
Yeah, but there was some sort of positives about it as well, like you were saying. Peter, you work sort of over the summer with Karl over Zoom, sort of editing all these profiles. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that and why that was so good?
Yeah, I mean, it's been strange really because COVID has obviously had massive impact and massive negative impact, but amongst that, it's opened up other opportunities, as Karl was saying. One of those opportunities was for us to take all of the profiles that the team have produced and written and revised and done second and third drafts of. I think there's about 240 of them. And Karl and I sat down and we used to spend a couple of hours every day for about 10 weeks, and we worked through all of them and it enabled us to really make sure that they were consistent. So we got to week 9 or something, and we were working on villainous stars. And we were able to go back to week 1 when we were looking at the heroic stars and make sure they were balanced. And we did quite a lot of fine tuning and had the space and the time to do that. So it opened up that space for us. But I think COVID opened up other opportunities for the students as well. I mean, the objective of the Edge Hill University Press Crooked Dice kind of arrangement was to give students an opportunity to develop employability skills and vocational skills. And what it meant was we could actually pretty much finish the game within a year. And that then allowed us to start to think about how we were going to market the game under a sort of a time of COVID. What we were going to do to really give the game a virtual presence online and things like that. So it meant that we were able to structure a whole range of opportunities for the design team to get some real experience with marketing, public relations, web design, different kinds of writing, so fake reviews, quizzes, other profiles that we're planning on doing, and just fun stuff that would engage the community more broadly. So it's a very different experience, I think, for the 7TV design team, the 7TV fantasy design team, than it was for the 7TV pulp design team. But I think the fantasy design team have had a much broader and much more practical set of experiences than perhaps the pulp team did, who spent a good 6 weeks playtesting their profiles. You missed out on doing that, which is a real shame. But I think you've gained a lot more by thinking about how we're going to market the game, from sort of now, which is middle of February, through to its launch in June.
So there's been sort of like almost more positives that have come out of it than negatives, and we've adapted sort of really well to it, and it's actually shown quite a lot on the process of sort of designing these type of 7TV games. And so going into the future, there's a lot of things obviously that you'll obviously take away and sort of implement, like I was saying about maybe implementing like a Zoom sort of meeting once per week, as well as sort of the team meeting sort of physically in person. So yeah, it's been sort of a really interesting challenge, and I've gained a lot, and I'm sure when it all sort of hopefully sort of clears up soon, then we can all get together and sort of celebrate it by playing the game sort of on its release. But talking about its release, how's COVID affected the actual sort of launch of 7TV Fantasy? And perhaps maybe Karl, you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, the plan was to launch Fantasy at the UK Games Expo in it's the end of May, beginning of June, but almost all of the all events are cancelled at the moment. So there was the other week, the guys from the expo basically were going to roll things forward to August, and that's not really any good for us. We still plan to launch the game in June, and also by August, all of the students will have moved on and won't be at university anymore. So the whole point was to bring them to the expo and give them that experience of being able to kind of sell it back. So unfortunately, the expo has been cancelled, but the positives are that now the marketing, we know definitely what we're going to be doing. We're not kind of holding on anymore, and we can change the focus to, well, okay, how are we going to launch this online? Now, when we started the marketing work, that was kind of already built in. We have the stuff and the activity that we're going to do. How do we make sure that we can do it in either circumstance? We kind of assume we weren't going to be able to kind of get together then. But it now means, I think, hopefully, that you guys and the team are going to get a slightly kind of richer experience, because you're going to be able to develop that launch day rather than just being at the event and avoiding or trying to deal with 40,000 people. It's how do we market it and get it out and design an event and a day and to launch things. So that's quite exciting in its own right, I think.
Yeah, so the main point is that we'll all get an opportunity regardless of how the launch would have happened. And now that we're going with this online launch, it's still sort of great experience for me and the other members of the team, which is sort of really useful. But yeah, so we've obviously adapted to COVID-19. We've sort of done really well, and I think that's about wraps it up for today's episode. Unless you've got anything else sort of add about COVID-19 that we think we've missed.
I think I'd like to say that the way the team adapted to that sudden shift in March 2020, from meeting every week around a table for doing the design work, to then moving straight onto Zoom and carrying on without a break, and actually carrying on right the way through the summer, which we didn't do with the summer between year 1 and year 2 in Pulp, has been remarkable, and all credit to the design team and more broadly to students in general who did make that transition last year and have carried on being really flexible and working creatively and imaginatively with the teaching staff and with Karl and I in the 7TV context. Really remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because of that kind of dedicated focus and probably the distractions going on, we were way ahead of schedule right the way through, and that's a real testament to kind of the students and to you and the rest of the team, to be able to kind of work under that kind of quite weird circumstances, but actually end up getting us a kind of ahead of time. We were, I think, about 8 weeks ahead of kind of schedule with all the submissions for the stuff, and that's great.
So do you reckon if he wasn't that far ahead, it'd have been a lot harder at that sort of moment in time in that March period last year?
No, well, I think really we're still on track there, but the extra time that was kind of spent after that means that by the time all the profiles need to be submitted, we were way ahead of time, and I can only assume that's because people weren't allowed to go out and do other things. So
Got nothing else to do.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And I think we got used to working like that as well. So when summer arrived, and everybody usually disappears for summer, we didn't. We just stayed together as a design team, and we carried on meeting, perhaps a little less frequently, but we just carried on working on the game and working on the design and working on the plans, fine-tuning magic systems and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that was another advantage. We extended the development period for 3.5 months across summer 2020, really. And all credit to the design team who carried on working over their summer holes. Although, as Karl said, you probably weren't really able to do very much else. So,
Well, we had that 1 month where you could go out, couldn't you? So
that's true. Yeah. What about that? I've been inside.
All right, well, thanks, guys. That'll probably wrap it up for today's episode. But thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you, Karl. Thank you, Peter. And we'll see you all next week in 7TV Behind the Scenes.
Good luck.